every Enchanted Rare in Disney Lorcana. Let's rank them. Alright y'all, so with the newest set of Into the Inklands that was just released in LGS's about a week ago or so, we now have a card pool of 42 Enchanted Rares within the first 3 retail sets. So I thought it might be fun to just put a list together in ascending order of sort of the top chase cards in Disney Lorcana, of course all of those being Enchanted Rares. And so what we'll do is we'll sort of put a tier list together and work our way up in ascending order and see what cards kind of rise to the top. So a couple of points of just like preface before we start with this list. The first being is that the list will be fluid, right? So what I would envision for this list is maybe we'll come back together after every new set, assuming that there'll be probably 12 to 18, maybe more, Enchanted Rares within every new set that gets released every quarter or so. We'll come back together, we'll redo the list and kind of see what cards are going up, what cards are going down, and kind of just see how the list adjusts set by set. So that would be the first thing. The second point would be that I'll be looking at this just from a long-term collector's perspective. When I say long-term, I typically tend to think of that in terms of like 5+ years. So when I think short-term, I always think of like calendar years. So if I was to say, oh, I think I'm gonna buy this card in March of 2024 and sell it in November of 2024, that would be a short-term investment or short-term hold, which to be honest, I don't really do. More times than not, I typically just try to buy something that I truly want for my collection and hold it throughout the long term. So that's how I'm going to look at it through a 5-year period. And also I'll be going based off of the PIN acronym that we also talked about in the Pokemon vs. Lorcana video. If you haven't seen that video, I'll put a link in the description. Go check that out. We had a lot of fun talking about kind of breaking down those two sets of base set and also of first chapter and just kind of some similarities that they might have going forward. But if you didn't see that video, the PIN acronym, just essentially the P stands for product, the I stands for intellectual property, and then the N stands for nostalgia. And that's kind of how I look at all of my collectible investments over a long-term period. So I'm going to kind of just use that sort of different mashup of those 3 things to try to put together a list for you all. And then the final thing that I'll say is that this list, of course, I'm sure will be different than how you might do it at home. And the simple reason for that is just because everybody has their own collection journey that they're on, right? I've had the opportunity to talk to so many of you that have so many fun and amazing aspirations with your collection, whether it be wanting to collect heroes or villains or specific cards in general, like specific characters, whether it be whether it be like Elsa's or even like Scrooge McDuck, which is just so cool. So everybody has their own journey. So your list will almost undoubtedly look different than mine. But what I'm going to try to do is just give you a list of what I think is interesting and maybe just call out some things to think about along the way as you're building out this collection and what you might want to keep your eyes on from an investment and collective perspective long term. So with that, let's get into it. All right, guys, so what you're looking at here is what I am going to call our Enchanted Mountain. So we are going to build this up in ascending order. There's going to be 6 different tiers working their way up the mountain until we get to what we would call the most collectible card in Disney Lorcana right now. Each one of these tiers is going to have their own theme to it, and we're just going to work our way up the tiers list and sort of just talk about these different themes, what they mean going forward, and how we could maybe see these certain individual cards and these certain individual tiers go up and down as more sets come into the market. So looking at our first set within the tiers, sort of before we even get into the tiers, let's look at what I would just call honorable mentions. I mean, look, we have 42 cards that we're trying to talk about in a very short amount of time. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a pool of honorable mention Enchanted Rares. The first thing that I'm going to say about these cards, and I'm probably going to say this more than once in this video, if you are looking at one of these cards on this list right now, and you're saying to yourself, how can he have this card all the way down this list? I can't believe that. That card should be all the way up in, in tier 3, 4, it should be somewhere up there. I totally understand you. At the end of the day, all of these cards are extremely collectible and should be extremely sought after because they all share one big sort of common thread, which is they're very difficult to pull. They're very difficult to come by. If we look at it from a commodities perspective, commodities meaning just assets that there are less and less and less and less of in the world, there were fewer of all of these cards that you see printed than every other card in Disney Lorcana besides the ones that are of course going to be on the pyramid. So as you're looking at these cards, just know that these cards are all going to be cards that I will be looking to pick up for my collection. They're extremely rare, extremely sought after, and they are going to hold tremendous value long term. But we're dealing with the best of the best here, right? So we have to be able to sort of draw lines in the sand somewhere as we build up this list. So, you'll see some cards in here, cards that I could see jump up the list at some point, depending on certain metas, certain decks, new movies that come out into the fray within Disney. On the animated side, going forward, you can't discount something like that as well. So I could see these cards going up at some point, but for now, they're going to be in the honorable mention section, and we'll see what they do going forward. All right, guys, so going to our first tier on the mountain, and remember, with each one of these tiers, they're each going to carry with them a certain theme, and we're going to talk about those themes as we work our way in ascending order up the mountain. So tier number 6, this tier we're going to call Desired for Now. Now, each one of these cards, first and foremost, they're desired for now, and they're going to be desired into the future as well. Very much just a catchy title because, as we said with the honorable mention tier, these cards are going to be extremely sought after long term. However, they also carry with them a couple of extra things that it's going to be interesting to see how much weight they carry going forward in the collectible market of Lorcana. The two big areas of focus that I'm concerned with right now, the first being is that some of these cards are a part of the most recent set of Into the Inklands. So when I think about that, I think, okay, here's this new shiny toy. I want to collect all of the cards from the newest set. I mean, that's very much like, I don't care whether you're a kid, an adult, if you're into collecting, you want the newest thing, right? So some of them are getting bolstered up because of that, but then also some of them are getting bolstered as well with the fact that some of these cards are extremely meta relevant right now, and we don't know what the meta will look like 1, 3, 5 years from now. Right now, we know that Beast Relentless is a card that's very used in the meta. One card that's on the huge come up in the meta is Jafar. I never thought I would have seen this, but I thought we were going to wait until probably set 5, 6, 7 before we got really strong hero decks, villain decks, princess decks, things that have tremendous synergy. We actually have the makings of a very strong character deck with Jafar 3 sets in, which is really impressive for Lorcana to do that only 3 sets in. So right now, as we look at Jafar, among other things, this is a very sought after card because of how meta relevant it is. And also, I mean, of course, it's just such a cool card. Amazing artwork, classic character from Aladdin. I'm not meaning to say that this card's ever going to like plummet long term, because that's just not going to happen. If anything, Jafar is probably going to go up long term. But it will be interesting to see how these cards fare in future mountains that we do together. When, say, for instance, the next set that gets released, maybe they have some more Disney princesses that get Enchanted Rares. How will that look compared to cards that are very popular in Disney's past and also are very meta relevant, but maybe the meta starts to shift? So we'll see how that looks going forward, but all of these cards, phenomenal. Go grab them right now. They deserve their place on the mountain, and we'll see if they can work their way up the mountain long term. All right, guys, so moving on to tier 5, we're gonna call this tier Heroes and History. So the one big theme that you're gonna be able to see with each one of these cards is now we're starting to work our way towards certain taxes that might come in to the collector's market, and that starts with heroes. You know, that starts with cards like Aladdin, like Peter Pan, like Hercules, Genie, Maui, like all the cards that are on this list. These are cards that are very pivotal characters in Disney's history, and I do think that that will carry with it some sort of tax long term. We'll have to see what that means. But also when I say history, I also mean that while some of these cards, maybe they aren't the main hero from their movie, like Genie and Maui, they're amazing characters who we all love, but it's not Aladdin and it's not Moana, right? So they are sort of sub-characters, right? Supporting roles. At the same time, both of those cards were printed in the first chapter, which is the first set, which has a lot of history behind it. So you have big name characters printed in the first ever set, and I do think that that's going to carry weight long term. So for these cards, we'll see how they can move up and down the mountain. I do think that the next one that we do together, you'll probably see some go up and some go down depending on what cards are printed from now to then. One example I would have, I'd be very interested to see Maui. We predicted in our Into the Inklands prediction video that Moana had a very good chance to be an Enchanted Rare in this Into the Inkland set. She had the playmat, it stood to believe, similar to Jafar being on, front and center on the cover of the newest set, it stood to believe that Moana would maybe get her Enchanted Rare within this new set as well. It didn't happen, and that's okay, but I do think that it's not a matter of if, it's when. It's inevitable that Moana's probably going to get her Enchanted Rare at some point. What does that do to the stock of Maui's card going forward? We'll just have to see, but all of these cards are just absolutely timeless, absolutely prevalent in the current collector's market, and you should be looking to pick them up going forward as we see new iterations of Lorcana, new sets come out. Moving up the list, we have our next tier, and we are going to call this tier Disney and Taxes. We have now arrived at a place in the mountain where I believe is what we're going to call sort of the line in the sand of what I believe is the number one collector's taxed card or archetype in Disney Lorcana, and that is princesses. As you see here, this entire tier are princesses, and I believe that anything that can get up to this tier or higher at this point in the collector's market of Lorcana, you either need to be a Disney princess or you need to have something going for you as a card that is so prevalent in the collector's market that it almost needs to fight for space this high up the board. When I think about cards that as a collector I want to be collecting, of course, the big subtype that I'm thinking of is Enchanted Rares, right? Like right now, if someone said, if you had just an infinite amount of time, infinite amount of resources, what would you be looking to collect first? I would say all of the Enchanted Rares. And then if they said, well, let's say you can't do that. Like out of those Enchanted Rares, what would you be looking to go for first? I would say the Disney Princess Enchanted Rares. That would be the thing that I would be trying to check off my list first. And I believe that that's probably going to be a somewhat shared feeling throughout the collector's market within the industry. So I do think that as we go forward here, I mean, for some of these cards, I see no reason why they can't keep going higher. I do think we probably arrive at our first somewhat questionable Enchanted Rare here with Belle. I actually think that there's probably a lot of you out there right now that think that Belle should be higher. And I agree with you. I mean, I understand where you'd be coming from with that thought. And we're going to talk about those tiers, those other tiers, as we work our way up the list. But looking at these Disney Princess cards, right now, when you look at the price of them, some of that, once again, is going to be meta relevant. So you might see a card like Snow White, like Alice. I mean, all cards are trying to be sort of used and jockeyed for position with different ink combinations, different deck combinations, but some of them just aren't as good as others, right? I do think long term, when we are at a place where the meta is so far advanced from these, let's be real, what are current vintage sets that will be vintage sets in the future, I think that's when you're going to start seeing individual collectors saying, wow, now that they're printing so much more of set 6, 7, 8 with Lorcana, it's so much harder to find the first chapter, Rise of the Floodborn. It's so much harder to find these sets that now these cards, I really better make sure I get my hands on these specific Disney princesses so I can build out that section of my binder, build out that collection, and sort of check that box before it sort of gets too late for me where it starts to get a little too expensive and I'm a little too blocked out from the market. So with the Disney princesses, I just think it's a matter of time before all of them explode in price, just because I do think it is the number one tax that you're going to see in this collector's market. Moving up the list, again, working our way up the mountain into tier 3. This tier is called First Chapter Good Stuff. These are just cards that are very sought after Enchanted Rares from the first set of Lorcana. You mash them together. The biggest thing that these three have in common is that they are very prevalent cards from the first ever set with Lorcana. And as we know, with Pokemon, with Yu-Gi-Oh!, with Magic, with any TCG that has been able to stand the test of time, the first set is always the one that is going to be so polarizing, so magnified, and these three cards are cards that long term are undoubtedly going to go up in price. What I would say is that you're probably looking at two of them, and you can kind of see where I'm getting at with two of them. There's probably one that feels like it might be a little bit out of place, but let's break down all three of them here. So I think that very easily here, Mickey Wayward Sorcerer and Stitch Carefree Surfer. when we look at Mickey, when we think Disney, we either think the princesses or we think Mickey. This is the Enchanted Rare, the Enchanted Mickey from the first chapter. So I don't think it should come as any surprise that Mickey has sort of made his way this high up the list. It is one of the main themes, main properties of Disney. Makes a lot of sense to give him an Enchanted Rare from the first from the first chapter. And so it would make sense to have Mickey this high up. Stitch Carefree Surfer, this one is a little bit more, how much of Stitch did you watch growing up? What I would say with Stitch is that Disney Lorcana has really seemed like they want to make him a star. Like, when I think of Stitch and I think of Lorcana, I'm thinking to myself, okay, what are all the different products that they have come out with or are trying to come out with Stitch? And I'm thinking to myself, okay, first of all, he was one of the promos, one of the D23 promos, Rockstar Stitch, with the first ever cards that were released in Lorcana when they did do that release at the convention. Then, within the first chapter, they gave him an Enchanted Rare, as well as that super rare of Rockstar Stitch that was reprinted from the D23 promos. Then from there, he's also getting playmats that are in Into the Inklands. It has been confirmed that he's going to be having the first ever promo Enchanted Rare from tournament, official tournament play, as well as the champion playmat. They like Stitch, and I don't blame them. So Stitch is a character that they really seem to be putting time and focus into. So I'm going to ride that wave, and I'm going to say that Stitch Carefree Surfer is a card that, even as it exits the meta from a relevance standpoint, it's still a strong card going forward. And then that brings us to the final card. A card that you're probably you can't help but sort of look over at it and just say, why is this card this high up the list? This is also a theme that you're going to see with another card that's going to make its way up the mountain as we continue on. But let's keep it with this tier and talk about Simba here. So the biggest two things with Simba, here's the smaller thing. The smaller thing is, when we think about Disney classics, we think about Lion King, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, all of, Disney princess, timeless classic Disney. Simba fits in perfectly with that, and he is also from the first chapter. I do think there will be attacks that will come with that. However, from a collector standpoint, I think the much bigger thing, and this is just a hunch right now, remember the list is fluid. The next time we do this list, he might go down, he might go up. It's ever changing and ever evolving. However, this is one of the cards that did have an errata to it. Now, it remains to be seen, and actually someone please in the comments let me know, because I actually don't know this, and I've tried to do research on it, but I feel like I get conflicting theories and things like that. But with the pre-errata for Simba saying, I forget if it's challenged or challenger, when challenged or when challenging, something like that. Regardless of what the mechanic reads, from a collector's perspective, there is going to be a distinct understanding of what the first printed Simba is and what the errated Simba is, assuming that when they do reprint, which I'm sure that they will continue to reprint the first chapter because it is the first set ever, as they do that, there's going to be more and more and more errated Simbas that hit the market, and there will be less and less and less of the original ones, the pre-errated ones. To me, if you get that pre-errata Simba in your hands, you have an asset that you can identify as this was one of the first ever cards to hit Lorcana ever. And I think that carries weight as a collector. There are a lot of very niche collectors out there that like collecting things like misprints, like miscut cards, things of that nature. So I do think that Simba has a little something going for him that the others might not. We'll see how it goes going forward, but for now, we're going to throw him up there. Getting to the top tiers, these are the cream of the crop cards as it stands right now in Lorcana. So let's get to tier number 2. This tier is going to be called Different Stories. So really, I look at these two cards and I see two cards that are on the same tier of the mountain, but are here for very different reasons. Let's start with probably the very obvious one. If you are looking at Cinderella right now, you are probably not surprised in the slightest that she made it this high up the list. This card is the most, or at least in my opinion, the most sought after card in Rise of the Floodborn. She is a Disney princess, she is meta relevant, and she has phenomenal artwork. This card literally has everything going for it. So when we think about Cinderella, we think about a card that makes total sense to go for long term as a collector, a card that you want to get your hands on now before they stop printing Rise of the Floodborn and it becomes more and more and more difficult to get this specific Disney princess to build out your collection. So Cinderella's a no-brainer. Ursula is very different. As it stands right now, TCG Player limited listing, unverified, verified listings, Ursula right now is the second most expensive Enchanted Rare in Lorcana. Now, some of that has to do with the obvious, is that she's in the newest set and she's very meta relevant right now. However, some of you probably know where I'm going with this, and some of you are probably saying to yourself, well then why isn't she in that bottom tier, that tier 6? Why isn't she right next to Jafar? Because, as well as Simba, as some of you, most of you probably know, Ursula also has a very key misprint that happened on her card. She is printed as a Storyborn. She's supposed to be printed as a Dreamborn. And if you actually go look on TCG Player, you will see the corrected artwork as a Dreamborn. Now, if you have an Ursula, you can go look at it right now. You probably will have, again, this at time of recording, this is late February, early March 2024. So looking at that right now, you will probably see that you have a Storyborn Ursula. Once again, you have a card that is going to be errated and corrected to what it should actually be. And as more and more and more of these Ursulas get reprinted, assuming that they do print the errata, you are going to have something that is very, very rare in the world of Disney Lorcana. Now, with Simba and Ursula, the biggest call out that I would make here when it comes to reprints and trying to think about this going forward, and why I put so much stock in both of these cards going forward as misprints, right now we're looking at the newest sets that are coming out in Lorcana, and we're saying to ourselves, okay, are they going to reprint Into the Inklands? Are they going to reprint Rise of the Floodborn, first chapter? Are they going to reprint those boxes? Are they going to make more blisters of those? And in my opinion, they probably will, especially if the game does take off, if the game is popular. But I also see another avenue for reprints with some of these different sets in the form of what we'll just call, I'll just keep it broad and I'll just call it special edition sets. So thinking about another extremely successful franchise like Pokemon, they are looking for any reason to repackage and repurpose packs into different forms of marketing, whether those are ETBs or special editions, whatever those might be. So when we think about Disney Lorcana, because they have immediately from the first chapter decided that they are going to have alternate artwork chase cards in those sets, to me, that shows me that they value the collector. So I believe that they're going to do something similar with special edition sets where they come out with promo cards within those special edition sets, right? Just more reasons to get product in your hand. Assuming that they do that, they're going to print more Into the Inklands. They're going to reprint more first chapter. More and more Ursulas and Simbas will hit the market. And you have an opportunity right now to pick something up that is going to be more and more rare in the collector world. So Ursula is going to be up here for now. She is also the second most expensive Enchanted. If you want to go with that, you know, as justification as well, that makes sense as well. But those two very well deserving of their place almost atop the mountain. All right, guys. So the number one card at the top of the mountain, at the Misty Mountaintop. It will probably come as no surprise to any of us, but at number one at the top is Elsa. Now, this card and this tier, I'm naming this tier buying, not renting. What I mean by this is when I think about Elsa and I think about this space at the very tip top of the mountain and how long will this card be here, I don't look at Elsa as just staying up here for maybe a couple weeks, couple months, maybe a year. I don't see that. I see this card being here for a very, very long time. I'll be honest, instead of calling it Enchanted Mountain, I almost called it Elsa's Mountain because I really believe that this card is going to have its place up top for a very, very long time. Elsa has things going for her that are going to be very difficult to move off of in the market. It is the number one chase card. It is the number one princess from the number one set that was ever printed in a TCG. That is very tough to overcome. Elsa is the modern day princess. When we think about princesses like Cinderella, who has made her way all the way up the mountain. Elsa is that modern day princess, and in a lot of ways, that's actually even more valuable for a collector because that's more and more years that Elsa can stretch out. Maybe, I mean, I don't know this. I like to check IMDb for like movies and things like that, but if you told me there were Frozen 3 coming out right now, I would not be surprised in the least. If you told me if there were a Frozen series coming out right now, that wouldn't surprise me in the least. Frozen merchandise. I mean, Elsa is just one of the hottest Disney properties in the entire space. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. Kids in the modern era, they love Elsa. So because of that, I see it being very difficult to move off of Elsa. And then also from a collector's perspective, and we've talked about this on the channel as well, if I am a collector, a big time collector in other TCG circles, and I am looking to just dip my toe into Lorcana, I'm not looking to come in, collect all the Enchanted Rares, but I do want to make sure that I have the #1 asset in a rising TCG. Elsa is going to be the card that most people point towards. So that's also going to help with her prices. That's one of those things where when we look at Charizard from base set, Blue Eyes White Dragon from LOB, the reason why those cards have this massive stratospheric gap between them and the next most expensive card in a retail set, it's because of that secondary market, that sort of exterior market that maybe these collectors aren't a part of that specific TCG circle, but they're willing to pay what they need to pay to get their hands on one of these cards. So the collector pool gets so much bigger when you look at the tip top, of a TCG. And that's where Elsa is right now. So because of that, that to me is momentum that I just don't see stopping anytime soon, but we will see how it fares. But you guys, that is our list of all of the Enchanted Rares in Disney Lorcana. So that's going to do it for today's episode. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, interact with me in the comment section. Let me know what cards you would have higher or lower on your list, what collection journeys you're on right now. I can't wait to hear from all of you. Thank you so much for supporting the channel, and I'll see you all on the other side. Peace out.